Today I want to tell you about a big issue the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, JPEF, recently explored in a new policy brief about funding for public schools. Our lawmakers are grappling with this issue in Tallahassee right now. It starts with missing students. Across the country, millions of students that were expected to enroll in school last fall did not show up. Education funding follows the student, so enrollment drops could lead to funding losses that have lasting impacts on all public school students. While some families may choose other schooling options after the pandemic, traditional public schools are the only schools constitutionally required to accept any students in their county. So, we expect many of these missing students to return to public schools once the pandemic is over, and schools will need more funding, not less, to support students who have learning losses from the pandemic. But history teaches us that the risk to education funding right now is real. After the Great Recession in 2008, public schools lost a total of nearly $600 billion in state and local revenue across the U.S. In the decade after the recession, economic activity grew by 17%, while funding for public schools increased by only 6%. Another important piece of context is how Florida funds schools in normal times. A report from the Education Law Center evaluated Florida for the fairness of its public education funding. The results were not positive. Funding fairness is determined by three factors which measure how Florida funds schools, how equitably funding is distributed to high poverty districts, and how much Florida spends on education as a percentage of GDP. On these three measures, Florida scored 1 D and 2 Fs. What does this mean for pandemic recovery? It means it's more important than ever that the state move toward fairer funding right now. Some lawmakers have wondered whether the federal stimulus will protect schools if state funding is cut. But it is important to understand that the federal stimulus is a crisis response. For the long-term recovery of schools, state funding is essential. To learn more, check out our latest policy brief, Pandemic Recovery, Missing Students, and Funding for Public Schools. You can find it at jaxpef.org/advocacy center.